Hello everyone, my name is Stu Flanders. I'm here today to talk to you about quality log messages and more importantly, how to write them. A little bit of background on me, I am a consulting architect at VMware. I'm actually part of VMware's Log Insight team that does log analysis, but the things I'm talking about today are going to be log agnostic. So it won't matter whether you're running Log Insight or some other logging tool, but at the end of the day, what really matters is that you're actually analyzing your logs. You can do troubleshooting, root cause analysis, and everything that the power of logs brings to you today. I'm a VCAP DCA DCD, and if you want to learn more about Log Insight or logging in general, please take a look at my blog or my Twitter. So first and foremost, why do logs matter? And what I have for you here are several examples of log messages. So if we actually look at these, there are very specific things that people care about. First and foremost, we have timestamps. Timestamps are important because you want to be able to correlate information. If you're going to do troubleshooting and root cause analysis, you need to be able to look at a specific point in time when things happen so you can actually troubleshoot that and drill down into your events. So of course this means that time in general is important. You need things like NTP across your environment to ensure you're getting the right timestamps in your log messages that you're aggregating throughout your environment. Next, you have things like components. This is very frequent in application logs. So what component actually generated the message? This is important for developers that are trying to troubleshoot and figure out what's going on in your environment. They'll know which developers need to be engaged to solve which problems. Also, there's more generic metadata. So again, this could be application-specific, software-specific, but this metadata can be displayed in a variety of different ways. Maybe it's a key-value pair. Maybe it's comma-separated values. Maybe it's some Apache common log format. All of these are different ways to further get, for lack of a better word, subcomponents within your actual messages to figure out what's happening and where. Then there are metrics. There's actually performance information, very common in your unstructured log messages. And these numbers are important. You can get averages, maxes, mins. You can see trending over time. Again, bringing time and metrics together. This is important when you're troubleshooting and performing root cause analysis as well. And then finally, how about transactions? You might have one or more log messages that are all related to the same exact incident that happened in your environment. This is known as a transaction. You want to be able to follow it from start to end. You want to know how long it took. You want to know what user initiated it, and of course you want to know whether it was successful or not. All of this is possible by analyzing log messages today. So let's actually talk about log quality. First, the good. There are actually some standards today. One of them is syslog, the most common way to aggregate log messages in your environment today. And what's nice about syslog is it actually provides some RFCs. One of those is 3164. This is the older syslog RFC. And you can see that it provides a nice little format here. A priority and severity field at the very beginning, a timestamp, a host name, an app name, possibly a PID, and then a message. Anything that the user wants to write to give additional information about what's going on. This is great. Now, there are a couple different formats here. Like, for example, you don't have to have the PID. There doesn't have to be a colon after the app name, so you have to be aware of these nuances in the logs, but this provides some structure and the messages that you need to analyze. Very cool. But the messages part of this is unstructured, and so maybe it's really hard to extract the useful bits of information out of it. So a new RFC was created called 5424. It looks very similar, but it mandates a couple more things. First, the proc ID and message ID are now required. They're not optional. And you can now add structured data. That is actually optional. So now you can add like key value pairs directly into the structured data part of the syslog formats, and then have the rest of your unstructured data be in the message part, which is really nice. It makes it much easier to perform troubleshooting and root cause analysis. Now again, there are some differences here. Like I said, structured data doesn't have to be there, so it's an option, but it's very powerful and something that could be and should be leveraged. The message, though, is the area that I want to focus on. Besides the length of it being defined, nothing else in the RFC tells you what can and cannot be in the message. It's really free form. That's powerful because you can write whatever you want, but it can also cause some pain points because it becomes very hard to extract the useful bits of information that you really care about. I'll talk about more about that in a minute. And then, of course, there are multi-line messages, which the syslog RFC doesn't really handle today. So if you want to do transaction support and the like with multi-line messages, that's a bit harder. Okay, so let's talk about the bad, the unstructured in the syslog. So I have here for you an example log file. I actually stole this from William Lamb's Virtually Ghetto blog. You might recognize the link at the top. And because we're at VMworld, I am going to pick fun at VMware, more specifically ESXi. What I've done is I've highlighted here a subsection of the event that's talking about iSCSI events. And if you actually look here, there's a bunch of different things going on, and it's kind of hard to read, but you can see failed in there, so there's definitely some problems going on. So let's actually drill down just into this specific subset and look at the actual log messages. So first, how many different log messages do you see here? Let me help. First, we have some key value pairs. That's nice, that's easy to extract. However, there's several different formats for the key value pairs. First, you can see that we have key equals value. Sometimes there's a space between the key and the value and the equal sign. Sometimes the value is in parentheses, and the key might contain a period, the value might contain an underscore. Well, I mean, there's all sorts of different formats going on here. This makes it really hard to extract out the useful bits of information. I guess if you're really good at regular expressions, it's possible, but life is a little bit harder because there is no standard structure here. What else? Well, there's unstructured information as well. How about the component? Sometimes it's uppercase, sometimes it's lowercase, sometimes there's a single colon, sometimes there's a double colon, sometimes there's no colon. All right, now I'm confused. Why is it different? We're talking about an iSCSI event. It's a transaction, actually. Probably the same developer wrote the code for the entire transaction. Why are there so many different formats? Now, this is following the syslog RFC. You don't see the host name because this is an application log writing to the file system. But if you send it over syslog, the host name actually gets added automatically. So we have the timestamp, we have the app name, and then we have the message part of the event. And the message part of the event is actually the problem. All right, well, what's missing? How about some standardization here across these log messages? How about some consistent metadata? Like I want everything to have component in it. I want everything to have a status. I want the status to be in the same location, in the same format, so I can extract it out. How about some additional useful information? Like, I don't know if you noticed, but this is actually 2 different transactions I have highlighted. You can't tell because there's no transaction ID, so I can't follow it from start to end. I have to basically look with the human eye to figure out what's going on. This makes troubleshooting root cause analysis harder. At the end of the day, the problem is there's no structure in the unstructured part of the message. We need to fix this. Now the ugly. Syslog is a standard that not everyone follows. The timestamp could be in a variety of different formats, making it very hard to correlate events. Not only that, but maybe the host name is missing. Maybe it's a host name, the short name, maybe it's an FQDN, maybe it's an IP address. Maybe I have to do DNS resolution and figure out what it is. Again, this is making my life harder when I'm actually looking at the logs. The syslog standard's not followed by everyone either. Any part of this could be missing. In application logs, they usually don't follow the syslog RFC because at the end of the day, they're probably collecting a support bundle and they're not forwarding these events over syslog, causing additional problems. Finally, there are other issues. Maybe some things that you really care about aren't actually logged. I mentioned transaction IDs. Maybe the logs are too verbose. I'm getting nothing but info or debug messages. I mean, some of those could be useful to tell me why an error or warning message occurred, but all of them may not be necessary. Actually, ESXi is notoriously verbose. It generates about 250 megabytes of logs a day. That's a lot for one hypervisor. And then, of course, there are actually bugs in the events. I've seen many log messages that say error. And then you might even see a knowledge base article from VMware that says it's safe to ignore this error. Well, then why is it an error? It's not really an error if I can ignore it, can it? Like, should I just remove it? Like, why didn't the developer remove it? Why do I need a knowledge base article for that? Now, I'm picking on VMware here, but any application log is actually guilty of this. You'll see this across any product, whether it's OpenStack, whether it's physical, whether it's virtual, whether it's in the cloud, it doesn't matter. Okay, so let's talk about quality logs. Why are they missing pieces of information? Well, maybe someone didn't think about it. Maybe the developer was only caring about their specific component and not thinking about how it interacts with other components in the environment. Okay, well, that makes sense. How about we don't aggregate those logs? We're just looking at them on one particular system. Well, I mean, if you aggregate across systems, then you see that transaction IDs are important. Being able to group them is important. Being able to find user information is important. But on a single system, it probably isn't. You're just looking at certain error messages and trying to figure out why they occurred. Or maybe you see a stack trace and you want to find out why the software is having problems on one particular device.
But you really need to correlate that across systems to figure out what the true severity and priority is. If only one device is generating a stack trace, maybe it's okay. If every device is generating a stack trace, maybe it's not okay. You can't answer that till you aggregate, and when you aggregate, you need the right information in your log messages. So how do you improve logging quality? Well, it really depends on if you're lucky enough to have a greenfield, where you can define the logging structure, or if you're in a brownfield where logs have already been written, so what do? In a greenfield, what I'm saying is take the time to actually think about the logging format and structure. What's important, what needs to be in there. Don't have it be an afterthought. Once you start writing log messages, it's really hard to change them. People start to rely on them. You have knowledge base articles, you have documentation. In the case of Log Insight, there are content packs that rely on those log messages. So once you have something, it's a little bit harder to go back. Take the time early, standardize across, make sure if you have different components or different development teams, they're all using the same standard. Now, in a brownfield, determine what each event should actually contain. I mentioned transaction IDs, or tenant information, user information. All that should be in the events. If it's not, find those missing bits of information that should be in everything, and then we can worry about adding it to your events. I'll talk about that in just a second. The final thing is the standards. Structured data and syslog RFC 5424 is your friend. If you know what's missing, like user ID or transaction ID, add it. Add it to the structured data. In a lot of cases, let's say you have a Java application. You're using log4j to write syslog messages. It's very easy to append structured data into the log4j appender. Your developers don't have to change their code. The existing log messages stay the same, but now you've added metadata that's critical to performing troubleshooting and root cause analysis in your environment. This is simple, this is easy, everyone can do it, even in a brownfield environment. Now, if you have the possibility of choosing a different standard, maybe JSON or LTSV format, you can use that as well, but typically that applies only to greenfield environments, and very few of us are dealing with greenfield environments. All right, so let's use a quick example here, vRealize automation. This is a real example from a VMware product. So back in the pre-6.0 days, we had a logging format that looked like the following. It had a timestamp, it had a host name, it has an app name, there's a component in there, and there's some unstructured data, which was good. I mean, it had useful bits of information. It didn't have tenant, it didn't have transaction ID. I don't know what the severity or the priority is in the message, but there's some useful bits. So they actually sat down, they looked at the log messages, and they said, well, what can we add? And then, of course, severity came up, priority came up, tenant came up. And they said, well, how do we add this? We're in a brownfield. The developers can't rewrite all their log messages. And so we used syslog RFC 5424, and we put in some structured data for them. We added the component explicitly. We added priority. We added a thread. The tenant ID actually couldn't be determined every single time. It became optional information. So they added it as a potential field that could be tacked onto the event if it was known. If it wasn't known, it's just not added. So now they can follow transactions, they can follow users, they know what component, they know the actual severity, and all they had to do was update the log4j appender. That's simple, that's easy. Anyone can do it. It didn't take a whole bunch of development effort, and it was very easy to roll out. You'll actually see this in 6.0 and in 6.1. And Log Insight uses this information to build content packs. Any logging provider could actually use this information, abstract it out, and provide a way to query over it, alert on it, and really find out what you care about in these events. It also adds, in this case, the ability of doing security and auditing. Now that I have tenant information or user information, I can actually figure out who did what, when, and why. Very, very powerful and goes beyond troubleshooting and root cause analysis. Thank you very much.